Hi, I will be discussing the bilabial stop consonants P and B throughout my presentation. Stop consonants are phonemes that are produced by completely obstructing the airstream once it enters the oral cavity. Stops are part of the obstruent class of consonants, which are non-resident consonants where the primary sound source is the noise at the level of constriction, which is the lips for P and B. There is more obstruction on the vocal folds when producing stops than for any other consonants. Stop consonants are also known as plosive consonants. The production of a plosive is differentiated by a closure in the oral cavity and a closure of the velopharyngeal port. That is, the velum is raised to prevent the breath stream from entering the nasal cavity. So the two main features that are vital in order to distinguish bilabial stops from most other consonants are, first, they stop the air. The production of stops involves a complete closure of the oral cavity for a brief moment. The second feature is the release. When the temporary stoppage of flow is over, air is then allowed to rush from the place where it was stopped out through the mouth. This is known as the release. There aren't really any specific rules for transcribing P and B. It's just important to note that you transcribe the phoneme P by using a lowercase p with backslashes on either side of it. And the same thing is done to transcribe the phoneme B, using a lowercase b and putting backslashes on each side of it. So the manner of P and B is stop. The place is bilabial, which means that both lips come together to produce both of the phonemes. In terms of voicing, though, P and B differ. P is unvoiced and aspirated, while B is voiced and unaspirated. Aspiration is the brief friction that results from the release of the stop consonants P and B. During articulation, the top and bottom lips are pressed together, and no air is allowed to escape until the two lips release contact. When producing P and B, the lips are closed, as you can see in the picture on the top left, and the tongue is in a neutral position, as denoted in the picture on the top right. However, the tongue can be placed anywhere in the oral cavity in preparation for the next sound in a word, which is generally a vowel. The picture on the bottom left shows how the tongue moves up to prepare to make the I sound, and the picture on the bottom right shows how the tongue lowers in preparation for the A sound. The position of the tongue does not affect P and B, however. These phonemes are only affected by the lips and contact made by the lips. P and B are cognates, which means they are two phonemes that have the same exact manner and place, but different voicing. The only difference between P and B is that P is voiceless, whereas B is voiced. The velum is closed and touching the pharyngeal wall when producing P and B. No air or sound is allowed to escape out the nasal cavity. In stop consonant production, the articulatory process is extremely fast. In fact, stops are among the shortest of all English phonemes. Prolonging the production of P and F is actually impossible. During the period of closure, the intraoral pressure, which is the air pressure within the oral cavity, increases because the impeded airstream can't get out of the oral cavity. This air pressure in the oral cavity is relieved once constriction is released, which results in the expulsion of a noise burst from the oral cavity. The phoneme P is a voiceless stop, so it only has one source of sound. The primary source of sound for P is at the point of constriction in the vocal tract, formed by the lips, which are the articulators. In other words, this sound source is the turbulent airflow that's generated when intraoral pressure is released. Contrastingly, B is a voiced stop, so it has two sources of sound. When B is produced, the vocal folds vibrate in conjunction with the release of the stop in the oral cavity. The primary sound source for B is still at the point of constriction in the vocal tract, which is the lips, and the secondary sound source is the vocal sound that's produced by the vibrating vocal folds. It takes more time to build up the necessary intraoral pressure when producing the voiceless stop P compared to the voiceless stop B. Because of this larger amount of acoustical energy that gets released during the production of P, P is actually perceived as being louder than B. A minimal pair is a pair of words in which the only difference is one phoneme. Some examples of minimal pairs for P and B are pear and bear, pour and bore, pin and bin, played and blade, plays and blaze, plank and blank, praise and braze, pride and bride, rope and robe, as well as tap and tab. Some allographs for P and B are the single P in peach and periwinkle, as well as the double Ps in happen and appointment. Now for some questions. Here are a few true or false questions about P and B. 1. True or false? During the production of plosives, the velum is closed and touching the pharyngeal wall. 2. True or false? During the production of stop consonants, some of the air comes out through the nasal cavity. 3. True or false? The phoneme B is voiced and aspirated. And now I have just one more question about P and B. Which phoneme is perceived as being louder, P or B? A says P because when speakers produce it, a larger amount of acoustical energy gets released. B says B because when speakers produce it, a large amount of acoustical energy gets released. C says B because it's aspirated, which means it's louder. D says P because it's aspirated, which means it's louder. And E says P and B are perceived to have an equal amount of loudness. Here are the answers to each of the questions. The answer to number 1 is true. The answer to number 2 is false, because no air or sound is allowed to escape out through the nasal cavity during the production of stop consonants. The answer to number 3 is also false. B is voiced, but it is unaspirated. And the answer to number 4 is A, which says P because when speakers produce it, a larger amount of acoustical energy gets released. And that's the end of my presentation. Here is my works cited page with all of the sources that I used. Thanks so much for listening.